Being an archipelago, the Philippines has more than 36,000 kilometers of shoreline, the fifth longest in the world. With large bodies of seawater come the abundance of salt. We used to have a thriving salt industry. Today, salt making in the country is a dying tradition, an ironic and sad reality. This is our love letter to the beautiful Irasans or salt beds of the past, and the few ones that remain today. Those postcard-worthy scenes of gallant salt makers, water birds eclipsing the sky, their skins glistening with sweat as they toil under the incessant heat, a view that is vanishing along with the precious salt that these artisans make. This is the heirloom Irasan of Kawit, Cavite. In the early 90s, salt harvesting was a well-rewarded practice. There were 5 major salt producers in the country: Pangasinan, Bulacan, Occidental Mindoro, and Cavite. The Philippines was self-sufficient in salt, but with import liberalization, years of urbanization, and the subsequent ASIN Law passed in '95, disallowing uniodized salt to be sold, salt farms began to dwindle in number. In Kawit, Cavite, we met one of the 2 remaining Mang-iiras families or salt makers. Among them was 55-year-old Nerly, who learned to harvest salt as a young boy in the 80s.
Ako nga pala si Nerly Kahalili ng San Juan Dos, Tabeleta, Cavite. Bata pa ako nung ako yung unang humawak ng pwesto dyan sa asinan. Umiyak ako dahil bata pa nga ako noon. Dahil puro matatanda kasama ko noong panahon na yon. Siyempre, lahat ng mabibigat napapasan ko. Dahil siyempre mga matatanda, hindi mo pwedeng basta utusan niya. Ikaw lang utusan. Diba? Ikaw naman, sulod ka. Saka magagawa Bata ka, bagong salya ka pa.
Due to the shortage of workers, some salt makers like Tatay Nerly have to tend to the salt beds in their land on their own. The process is long, tedious, and labor-intensive. The harvest season happens strictly during the dry season when the sun is at its peak, but the preparation of the salt beds begins way before that. From December until the beginning of summer around March, salt makers clean the salt beds, shallow artificial basins meant to extract salt from seawater through natural evaporation. Once done, they pile mounds of mud on the banigan to establish a flat base for the salt. When the soil dries up, they sweep the dust off the salt beds, add more water, let them dry, and clean it tediously until it's ready to be used for the salt making season. It's important to accomplish the whole process in a timely manner before the monsoon season takes over and puts their hard work to waste. In the next part of the process, the salt makers transfer salt water from a jiggered dam to their depository and fill the gaps in the salt beds with rocks. This is how they store seawater to ensure that it absorbs the level of salinity needed to produce the salt. This step takes as much as 2 months. Soon after, more seawater is transferred through pipes from one depository to another. The salt makers utilize different basins to store water in different stages of salinity to heighten the richness of the salt. This is carried out simultaneously as they clean the salt beds. Nerly explains the different depositories and how they use them to maximize the salinity level of the salt water. The initial water collected goes into the deposito and is then transferred to Primera, when its salinity level reaches 5. From Primera, they transfer it to Segunda and let it sit for 2 weeks to a month. At this point, the water salinity level reaches about 6 to 7. After this, the water is moved to the next depository, Tercera, then finally to Ultimo, the saltiest of the bunch with a salinity level of about 8 to 10. Each depository is also cleaned before any water is transferred, one depository at a time and not all at once. At every stage, the salinity level is measured with a tool, or for veteran salt makers like Nerly, they can tell by the taste. Once the water reaches its target salinity inside the ultimo, it's ready to be transferred to the banigan. One of the most crucial parts of this process is drying the salt water. It takes days or even weeks. After it solidifies, the salt is ready to be harvested. The sequence at which the salt is harvested affects the color of the salt and its uses. The first harvest, more grayish in color, is used for preserving fish, making salted eggs, curing carabao meat, or in the Filipino shrimp paste called bagoong. In France, this gray salt is also known as sel gris. It's actually quite prized in kitchens all over the world, saying that it contains more flavor and minerals. The next harvest, which yields cleaner and whiter salt, is sold to bakeries or in the local market, while the best ones may be eaten as is. For about 8 months of hard work, the salt makers earned 200 to 300 pesos for every sack of salt. It was in May when our team first visited the salt makers, but despite being in the middle of summer, they were plagued with rain. It was clear as day. They are on the front lines of climate change.
18 taon na akong nag-asin. Parang hindi katulad ng dati na inaalin namin sa asinan maganda. Nagbago nung pumasok tong 2000. Hindi na katulad ng dati mainit, laging mainit. Ngayon meron yung Abril, ulan. Siyempre yung mga taong dating nag-iiras, nawawala na ng gana. Kasi hirap ka, pagkatapos hindi ka kikita. Pag mula, patay ka Zero balance ka na naman doon. Maghihintay ka na naman ilang linggo, isang buwan. Bagong hirap. Tamo pag inulan yan, lilinisin mo na naman yan, isa-isa. Para kami suntok sa buwan na aandap-andap na ang panahon para bang pakipagsapalaran.
Another salt maker explained how this affects the quality of their salt.
Kaya ang asin natin gumaganda dahil sa amihan. Pag ang hangin nagbago, nagsabalas, naghabagat, ang asin natin pumapangit na, gumagaspang pa. Kaya katulad niya, papangit ng ulan, di ba? Kasi ang hangin paikot-ikot. Hindi katulad ng permi amihan laang. Lahat talaga, Talagang maputi talaga.
When July came, we returned for another visit in the hopes of seeing the full potential of a salt harvest in sunnier weather. Unfortunately, the weather still did not cooperate. Trying to save what they can, the artisans harvested some produce, albeit not as much as they expected, which meant more loss than profit.
Tayo, katulad niya, wala ibon, di ba? Maraming ibon na lipad na maputi. Pag ang pakpak daw ng itim ng mga katawan, paulan na yon. Paulan na.
Init, ulan. Hindi kami nakabuo ng isang buwan na na talagang harvest. Patlang din. Mga 500 lang inani naming asin na kaban. Noon, libo talaga Ngayon wala. Talagang konti. Pag umulan ng malakas, lubog to. Minsan, wina-water pump namin. Pinapunta namin dito yung tubig para matuyo. Pag lagi-lagi na ulan, lugi na kami sa gasolina.
Nahihirapan kami. Kasi imbes na makakasuporta sa amin yung trabaho namin, nawawala rin.
Kaya ikaw, pakikipagsapala. Kung pumasok ka dyan, ihanda mo na sarili mo. Alam mo na, ang panahon ganito-ganyan alam mo, sabihin mo, ano ba naman ito gano'n? Hindi mo naman sabihin, kalikasan yan Yan ang nakatagdahara dyan Magagawa ba tayo dyan?
Besides the challenges posed by unpredictable weather and the season caused by climate change, salt makers also reeled under the impact of the passage of the ASIN Law in '95. The Act for Salt Iodization, or ASIN, mandated that all salt sold in the country be iodized. While intended to combat the incidence of iodine deficiency among Filipinos, it doomed a thriving salt-making industry and the communities and families that depended on it. Without training and support to iodize their produce, the salt farmers were forced to leave their craft behind, as selling their salt technically became illegal.
Kukunti lang taga napasok na mag-iras. Kulang na sa trabador. Tapos nung nauso nga yung iodize, halos pinagbawal pa nga to. Kaya yung iba lalong hindi na nag-iras. Hinuhuli to nung nag-ano ng iodize. Kailangan iodize ang bilhin. Kaya humina lalo to.
Yung sa yung sa iodize, walang bumili ng asin namin. Kumbaga, parang binatas nila na hindi raw tong asin na to na panahon pa ng Hapon yata, hindi lang Hapon, no, Kastila pa may asin na. Huwag daw tangkilikin yung asin ganyan. Pulo-pulo asin namin dyan, walang bumili. Yun lang tinatrabaho dyan hindi naman kami, walang bayad dyan Kaya lang kami kikita pag meron ng asin. Ay, iyak ka, talagang iyak mo, dugot pawis yan. Makikipagsapala na lang. Tanggapin mo kung ano ibigay sa'yo, wala ka naman magagawa, di ba?
Dogged by threats of arrest, most salt farmers have given up on their livelihoods. In the next 2 decades, the Philippines turned more towards importing salts that were already iodized at a price lower than what was locally produced. While the ASIN Law responded to the country's health problems, which up until today is quite unclear whether or not the majority of the population suffers from a lack of iodine in our diet, it also presented 2 fronts that needed more foresight: helping the local salt industry to produce iodized salt, and giving consumers the choice to buy the kind of salt that they want. Artisanal salts at the end of the day should be more expensive than table salt and will unlikely be used by the majority of our population. There is good news though. The amendment to the law carving out artisanal salts from the law and allowing them to be sold has recently passed in the lower house and will soon go to the Senate next. The bill seeks to address the challenge for small local farmers to compete with large salt producers, especially in the global market. It also wants to revive the practice of making salt with different processes unique to certain locations in the country, pushing further the ultimate goal of geographical indication for our local products and produce. The question remains, can we still bring back the glory of Irasan, and are we willing to do what it takes to do so? We urge you to support your local salt producers in any way you can. Not only will they bring flavor to your table, but will spark much needed conversations about the state of our agricultural systems.